All right. So last week on the podcast, Ben, we talked about what do you say to open up a cold call such that the likelihood for you to actually have a good conversation goes up dramatically. And in this case, we're talking about having a 90% success rate. And so if anybody that's listening or watching the show missed that episode, I'll just link to that in the description below. So today, the question we get all the time is, okay, what do I say then, Brandon? What do I say if I use a good pattern interrupt? I'm able to nail that first 10 to 15 seconds, and the prospect says, sure, listen, go ahead. I'll have this conversation. You've got me intrigued. How do I use that very, very valuable real estate? What would be the first question that I would want to ask, Brandon, so that I can have that good conversation you keep talking about? And so that's what today's episode is going to be focused on. Now, the way that we're going to do this today is there's a lot to teach here. Like, we're going to get into some very, very advanced sales techniques that we teach to agents that we coach. And so I can't just wave a wand, unfortunately, for those of you watching this video or listening to this on the podcast. I wish that I could. I wish that I could just quickly wave a wand and then you get it. So you got to be a little bit patient. This is not like an Instagram reel or a TikTok video where I can just, boom, here's the magic technique. So it's going to take a second, but I promise it'll be worth it. All right. So I'm going to first talk about the way that most real estate scripts are being taught, that most real estate agents are using some type of an approach, like I'm going to share in a second, which is causing real estate agents, Ben, to question, man, I don't know. I make these calls and they just don't seem to go anywhere. And so the approach kind of looks like this. So this is a generic, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So most real estate scripts, and I don't care really who they're coming from, most of them are some version of this. And we're going to really, really focus on what's going on here and why this type of language simply just doesn't work very well, and what's going on to the brain as to why you're eliciting this defensiveness from prospects. Because often what we tell agents that we coach is that you are in fact responsible for how people respond to you. You're responsible for it. So the language that you decide to use or not use will determine how people respond to that language. So in this example, and by the way, I'm not sure if this is for you or not, you can decide. But if you're a real estate agent, you're watching this video and you're not earning at least $100,000 per year, you feel like you're overworked, you're underpaid, maybe even underappreciated, perhaps it's time to talk. If you're serious about growing your real estate sales business and you're open to having a conversation to determine if working with me as your coach makes sense or not, then click the link in the description beneath this video or simply go to reverseselling.com to book a call. This is like the cookie cutter cold calling script that you see. So it opens up with, hi, this is John with Big Wins Real Estate, period. Now, what are your issues, Ben, with just that so far? Any issues with that? Well, I know my iPad shut off, of course. There you go. How's that?
There we go. Perfect. Yeah. Well, I mean, one, it's all about me, right? It's all about John. It's where he's from, which we need to make it more about them. We talked a lot about this last week, but we just need to gain permission in the first few minutes that they're even open to having a conversation before we get into any of this.
That's right. Because here's what happens. We would call this, this is John with XYZ Real Estate. I'm calling as my agency has some buyers who are interested in buying a home in your area. This is what we would call a force. So this prospect in this context is what we would call forcing a conversation. So without breaking the pattern of how these calls typically are being received, and without gaining permission, you force your way into the conversation. This is going to increase what we talked about on last week's video, that sales resistance, or what we call psychological reactance, right? So we don't want that. We just don't want that. So we need to really look at this and say, okay, we don't want to increase reactance. We want to decrease reactance. Furthermore, if we look at this, if we start to look and say, can you tell me, and this is this language right here, can you tell me right here, forces the salesperson attempts to force the prospect to do something. And so we don't want to use that language. It's like telling the kid, don't touch the hot stove. All that language does is increase their motivation to touch the hot stove. So when you say, can you tell me, that language actually does the opposite. It actually puts the prospect, it motivates the prospect more so to not tell you. And it says, can you tell me if you're looking to sell your home either now or in the near future? Okay, so the problem with this is even if the prospect was ready to put a real estate sign in the front yard, because of this type of language, it does the exact opposite. It does exactly what I just said, which is it pulls out this psychological reactance. And so not only that, but here's the other thing, Ben, that it does. And I know you know this. This is more for the audience sake. When we ask what we would consider a question that has yes orientation. Are you interested in selling your home? Have you been thinking about selling your home? Anything like that is designed for you as a salesperson to hopefully get to have some prospect magically say, yeah, you know what? We were just hoping you were going to call us today. And yes, we are. That has so much what we call perceived bias. That, okay, you're a real estate agent. You're asking me a question that I know that if I give you the answer you're looking for, you are going to attack me from every end because you're a salesperson. And so even if the prospect wants to sell the home, because there's this built-in perceived bias, you're a salesperson. If I give you that answer, you're going to jump all over me. I'm still going to tell you, no, I'm not interested. And so it's the structure of the question that is the problem. And again, most real estate people don't know any better. If you look at all like the famous real estate, people, all of their scripts are of a version of what we just went through. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And
yeah,
all of this can work if you play the numbers games, but we're focused on skill. How do we get it better? And of course, those things have worked for a long time. People get results, but how can we get better? How can we do this better? That's what we're talking about.
That's right. So, and that's a really good point that you make. Because people will make comments. Well, I use this script and it works. Well, yes, if you do enough of anything and everything can work. We're talking about we're trying to increase your skill such that your conversion goes up, so that your efficiency goes up. Yeah, if you do 100 contacts a day, and your script is, hey, do you want to sell your house? Do you want to sell your house? Do you want to? Eventually, you're going to have someone who says, yep. Funny you should call. Yes, I am. What we're trying to say is, well, listen, what if you change the way in which you communicated such that you don't have to talk to 100 people to get one, but maybe it's 20 people to get two, which is what we see with the agents that we coach, right? We see that 10% conversion. So if you're talking to 20 people a day, the goal would be to have 2 of those people, based on your skill, turn into an opportunity for someone that you can actually go out and serve. So let's talk about this, and then we'll structure the framework for people. All right.
Yeah.
First and foremost, we as the salesperson, as we're cold calling, as we're doing outbound prospecting, it always starts with the mindset. And so our mindset is that I have to approach prospecting not from the standpoint of trying to convince people to sell their home, but my mindset is I have to look for people who are already thinking about selling. So this is the sorting process. I'm going to sort red gumballs from blue gumballs, right? And so in order to do that, we have to get to the truth.
That's right.
That is the whole thing that we're about to get into. How do I elicit just the truth? Yes, they want to sell. No, they don't want to sell, without me having a bias towards them telling me yes. Because if I have the bias and they feel as though I'm trying to get them to say yes, bad things happen. They tell me they don't want to move. when they really want to move. They tell me they want to move when they really don't want to move. They tell me they have a real estate agent already if they were to move when they don't have a real estate agent. They lie. And why do they lie? Because we put them in a position to lie. So with the technique, so the mindset is, okay, yes or no, I'm good either way. I don't have a bias towards yes. My goal is to find people that already have motivation. And I have to, as I'm sorting through these conversations, I have to make sure that I don't communicate the wrong message so that the people that have motivation, I don't screw that up. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to switch our entire communication from being structured to get yeses, and we're going to flip that to getting no's. Now, the audience is like, dude, what? What are you talking about? Why would we do that? Well, I'm going to teach it to you right now. So we really, really, really want to communicate, and we want to be the one to ask questions that have the prospect deal with objections so that we don't ever have to deal with them again. This makes prospecting fun. This makes cold calling much, much easier. And it helps, I think, people, Ben, get past call reluctance because they're so worried about dealing with objections. Well, what if you communicated in a way where you never got any more objections? Actually, you communicated in a way where you let the prospect handle all the objections and you could just stay right out of it. So we're going to teach the audience right now what we call reverse presumptive questions. So if someone's taking notes, this type of question with inside of our reverse selling methodology is called reverse presumptive questions. Those are designed to elicit arguments from the prospect that go against, that would help, I should say, your interest. So here's how we're going to do this. All right. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll teach them, Ben, a little bit. All right. So I'm going to do this. Can you see my screen again?
Perfect.
All right. So the first thing we have to teach them, Ben, is how to elicit the truth. All right. So when we're prospecting or we're cold calling, there's two arguments inside of the prospect's mind going on at the same time. It is to we'll call it to change, like to make change, to sell, or to have no change. And you can jump into if you want. Change or no change. This would be to move, just to keep this simple for the audience, not move. The problem with most scripts, and here's what we know based on human psychology, is that when we make an argument on this side of the quadrant and we say things like, do you want to move? This question, Ben, as you know, is a question that is us making the argument as a real estate agent for why the prospect should change, why they should move. And so teach the audience what happens when we ask questions on the side of the quadrant that would suggest the prospect doing something. What ends up happening most of the time?
Well, what happens when we talk to our kids and we tell them not to do something? They want to do the exact opposite. So
that's exactly right.
It gives that resistance, and they're gonna argue the opposite. Do you want to move? No, I don't think I do.
Beautiful. So if we use language like this that has yes orientation to benefit us, right? And we say things like, do you, or we ask things like, do you want to move? It is often going to be met with the prospect resisting that and saying, no, I don't want to move. Even when they may want to move. Even when may want to move. And it's because of the structure of the question and everything we just talked about. Okay. So the way in which we need to do this is different. We actually have to make an argument for no change. So we have to communicate on this side of the equation and allow prospects to argue the opposite side. So we have to make the argument for not moving in our initial script. The very, very, very first question, we are going to use psychological reactance to our advantage, because remember, psychological reactance happens when people feel like they're being told what to do, and nobody wants to be told what to do. So we're actually going to use that in the opposite way from this technique to help people vocalize the truth. So if we make an argument for not moving, or we make an assumption that they're not moving, we try to get that person to argue that they do want to move. Yes, I do. Ben, you're wrong. I do want to move. You with me so far?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So when we're doing this, so remember where we're at in this cold call. We've called the person. We've used some type of pattern interrupt. Hey, is that Ben? Ben says, yeah, that's Ben. I say, Ben, listen, you're going to hate me. I'm a real estate agent. I was hoping to ask you a quick question before you hung up. Would that be okay? Or would you prefer, never to talk to me again? And Ben says, yeah, go ahead. Ask a question. The first question, this is where we're at right now. We're at the very first question. Instead of asking Ben a yes-oriented question, I have to ask one of these types of questions. And that question might sound like this. I might say, Ben, well, I make a lot of these calls and I kind of get the feeling that if I were to just even bring up the idea of moving, you'd probably tell me there's no way you'd ever consider moving, regardless of how much you could sell for in this market. Am I right? Now, I've positioned this in a way where I have actually served Ben up with the objection as to why he wouldn't move, such that Ben now can deal with the objection himself. And either he agrees, which makes it easier for me to never have to deal with objections ever again. It's like if Ben were to say, yep, you're right. We love it here. We're never moving. This is the perfect spot for us. They're going to have to carry me out of this place. It's like, yeah, no worries. Like I said, I make a lot of these calls and I'd be shocked if he said something different. You don't have to deal with your objection ever again. Or because I'm telling Ben what I think he's going to tell me, he might respond and say, well, matter of fact, you're wrong. And he starts to argue for all his reasons or the reasons as to why he is moving. You want to speak to that a little bit, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the goal is to get to the truth and get to the truth as soon as possible. And this is just going to let their guard down. And by asking that in a way of you speaking to something that you think is going to happen, it actually lets them argue the opposite because you're stating it in a way that's more inviting for them to really just, one, like we talked about, argue against, but it's something that you're assuming is the case, which helps add to this. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we'll give you another example, right? So instead of saying things to prospects as it relates to, well, maybe they tell you they already have a real estate agent. Let's just use that. That's another very, very common thing that comes up, right? So most agents would try to argue and try to convince them to meet with them anyways. That's what they would do. So if I share my screen again, and I wish I could, so watch, if we stay on this whole thing, I think this will even be a bigger aha for some of the agents. This is a really, really good example. So a lot of people in communicating with prospects, the prospect will say something like, I already have an agent, right? This might be one of the objections that they're getting right away when they make a cold call. Most agents are trained to try to overcome that objection with some type of response that would suggest why what they said is irrelevant, and they're going to make the argument as to why they should meet with them anyways. And all that does, and for those of you that have been cold calling for any length of time, when you try to say, yep, I totally get it, and you try to use some type of objection handler as to why they should meet with you anyways, what ends up happening? Oh, it just pings it on the other side. They just dig their heels in even more, and the tension starts to rise. We call this the buyer-seller tug-of-war. Prospect serves you up with an objection or something you don't like, and then you try to combat that with some objection handler you heard from somebody, and then the prospect comes back and starts, and then there's this argument, this tug of war back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So the way in which we do this, that to, again, keep reactance down, keep sales resistance down, would be to we be the one to tell them that there's no way they'd meet with us, even if they believed that by doing business with us would be better in their behalf. So what that might sound like is this. So Ben says, well, I already have an agent. I say, totally. Most people I talk to do. Can I ask you a question about that before I hang up? Ben says, sure. What's that? I say, listen, I've been doing this a long time, and I kind of get the feeling that even if you did want to meet with me, and I'm not saying that you should or you ever would, but even if we did meet, and Ben, you genuinely believed what I was doing was very, very different than the agent that you already have, it wouldn't matter. There'd be no way you'd ever consider doing business with another agent, even if you believe they could do something better. Would that be fair? Now, right? Again, goes right back to this. I'm serving up to Ben the no. I've taken the no power away from Ben, so I'm the one who owns it. And I put it in Ben's court to deal with. So Ben, I serve Ben with the objection. Ben's the prospect. So Ben now has to say either, well, not necessarily. I mean, if you're doing something that's that different than my agent, I certainly would want to hear about it. Wouldn't that be nice? Or they say, well, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's my sister. So it wouldn't matter what you'd be doing. There'd be no way I could go not hire her. Fine. It's the truth. All I want is the truth. And the way in which we get to the truth is we have to speak using disarming honesty. That we actually are the one. And this is why this is such a refreshing approach to be the one to talk this way. And for prospects, they always say it all the time, like, wow, this is such a refreshing conversation from what all the other agents are speaking about, which is when you bring up the thing that most people are thinking or saying anyways, without the prospect having to say it, it works so much better. You have another example that you want to bring up, or I think you want to add something?
Yeah, I like to think about this in a way that whatever, let's say it's the percentage is really small for them to do something and really big for them not to do something. If we just go ahead and take whatever it is that they are not going to do, and we focus on that first, they have no choice but to argue the opposite, which is the small thing, right? So whatever you want to apply this to, just think about what would they say most of the time. And that's the approach that you want to take against this, right?
That's right.
Are you going to sell? Are you not going to sell? You'd lay on that. If it's real life and you're going in and you're asking for a favor from somebody, whatever you think that they're going to say, if you say that, you'll be shocked at the amount of times that they will actually do something that they would otherwise never do.
Yeah. It's like, calling an expired listing, right? The by far the number one objection that prospects learn really, really quick, allows them to get rid of agent calls as fast as possible, is just to say, well, we're no longer selling. And we know that response is virtually impossible to have, such that they were literally on the market less than 24 hours ago. So that in and of itself, and agents have such a hard time responding to that. So why don't we bring it out? So as an example, using this technique, right? We say things in the structure of it. We would have to teach it for like an hour and a half, and we don't have that type of time on the podcast. But the way in which you have to do this, if you heard a couple examples, and I'm going to give the audience another example here in just a second, is in this type of communication, we have to position something that we know the prospect potentially would bite on. We call it a hook. And so in this case, I'm calling an expired listing. And because I call a lot of expired listings, we know that a lot of them say, well, listen, I'm no longer selling, And so it's their attempt to get rid of people. So I'm the one who brings it up. Hey, listen, I saw the property had come off the market, and I'm assuming, I kind of get the feeling that it wouldn't matter if you got the perfect offer, had the price and terms you were looking for yesterday or more. You'd probably tell me it wouldn't matter. There's no way you're selling this thing anymore, right? Well, what do you mean? That's a much easier conversation to deal with versus, hey, this is Tom, Dick, or Harry calling with XYZ Real Estate, and I was calling to find out when you planned on interviewing the right agent for the job of selling your home. And then they're like, dude, I'm not selling anymore. Take me off your list. I'm sick of these calls. Go away. And you just ask a question that elicits so much defensiveness versus you being the one to say, listen, I kind of get the feeling you're probably not selling this thing anymore. Even if you could get an offer that you thought made all the sense in the world, right? And getting that person to deal with the objection to tell you why you're wrong. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's so good.
Yeah. Or it's a for sale by owner, right? Another example. Mr. For sale by owner, you know what? I talk to a lot of people who are selling on their own. And I get the feeling that if I were to say there's a strategy that potentially could put more money in your pocket by hiring me than selling on your own, you'd probably laugh. You tell me there's no way you could ever do that. You're selling this on your own, no matter what, right? No matter what. And how do people respond to that? Well, how are you going to do that? That's great. Now we have them pulling from us. Isn't that so much better than being on the side of convincing? Well, just meet with me. Just meet with me. Just meet with me. I'll show. No. And then you give the prospect all the power, all the leverage, all the control to kind of go back and forth. We want to eliminate that. We want to have the prospect deal with all the objections. And so this technique is super powerful. It's not easy because most people don't naturally communicate this way. But like in a real world example, right? You're talking with a friend. It's Friday night. Listen, hey, if I were to suggest us go to that new place, you'd probably tell me, dude, no, let's go to the place we always go to, right? Even if this new place is getting like ranting and raving reviews, you'd probably just want to tell me you go to the other place, right?
That's right.
No, I wouldn't say that. Let's go check it out. Let's go check it out. So hopefully people understand, at least conceptually, this. Because then I think next week what we can start to do is break down, what do you do when someone says, well, no, not necessarily. I mean, we kind of been considering selling. Then what do you do to start to elicit motivation? How do you start to uncover, is there a potential appointment opportunity here? What are the questions that you could ask? Again, furthermore, to understand their motivation around selling without getting them defensive. I'll just give you a little spoiler alert. What we're not going to ask is, well, what has you thinking about selling? Well, none of your damn business. So we're going to teach them how to communicate in a way where you can actually get somebody's true and real motivation without pissing them off. And we'll do that in next week's episode.